My name is James Rohn, and today I'm telling you the story of a woman who walked into a gunfight and walked out with a sheriff's trust. 2 guns, 1 dusty street, and neither one of them was backing down. Sheriff Amos Cutter had seen a lot of things in 15 years wearing a badge in frontier country, but he had never seen anything quite like this. A woman and a stranger to the town, a mail-order bride who had arrived just 4 days earlier and standing in the middle of Main Street with a revolver locked in a 2-handed grip so steady it looked carved from stone. Behind her, 2 wounded men groaning in the dirt, and a third uninjured but utterly cowed, not daring to move a muscle. 20 minutes before, 3 men had tried to rob the Bannack Mercantile in broad daylight, and Ruth Alden, the same soft-spoken bride who'd spent her first 4 days in town doing nothing more dangerous than unpacking dishes, had drawn a hidden revolver from beneath her shawl and ended the robbery herself. 1 shot, a disarmed hand, 2 men down before they even understood what was happening to them. By the time Sheriff Cutter arrived, the danger was already over. But instead of relief, his instinct was suspicion. Because in Amos Cutter's experience, a stranger who could shoot like that hadn't learned it doing anything innocent. He drew his own weapon, not because he thought she was still dangerous, but out of pure habit, pure hard-earned caution. And Ruth didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gun either. She looked him dead in the eye and said words that would change the entire tone of the conversation. She would lower her weapon the moment she was certain he intended to ask questions rather than simply assume answers, because that assumption, she told him, had been made about her once before, and it had cost someone she loved his life. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. The whole town seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether this standoff would end in a handshake or in a second round of gunfire, this time between the sheriff and the woman who had just saved his town. What Amos didn't know yet was that this single conversation on a dusty street was about to unravel a story that went back years, to a homestead in Kansas, a father's final sacrifice, and a grief neither of them had spoken of to anyone since. What would you have done in Amos Cutter's boots? Drop your guard for a stranger with an unexplained gift, or keep your weapon raised until you knew the whole truth? And if this kind of slow-burn frontier tension is your thing, hit that subscribe button. Drop a eye below and stick around. The night a father traded his life for hers. She was faster than every man on that homestead. It still wasn't enough to save the one person who mattered most. Ruth Alden hadn't always been a rancher's bride waiting nervously for a train to Montana. She had once been a homesteader's daughter in Kansas, the youngest child of a man named Micah Alden, who worked 80 acres of good bottom land along a creek that never ran dry, even in the cruelest years. That water was a blessing. It was also a target. A neighboring cattle outfit run by a hard, ambitious man named Garrett Voss had wanted that land and in that water went for years. Voss made offer after offer, each one lower than the last, certain the Aldens would eventually break under the pressure of defending land they couldn't truly protect. Micah Alden refused every single time, and because he suspected refusal alone might not be enough one day, he did something unusual for the era. He taught all 3 of his children to shoot, not out of love for violence, out of a father's plain, practical fear. Ruth turned out to be the best shot in the family, faster and steadier than either of her brothers. Her father took quiet pride in a skill he prayed she'd never actually need. She needed it in 1878. 3 of Voss's hired men rode onto the homestead in the dead of night. Meaning, by every account, Ruth has turned over in her mind 1,000 times since, only to intimidate, not to kill. But a single warning shot spooked everyone into real gunfire. And in that one unbearable second, Micah Alden did what any father might dream of doing and few ever actually get the chance to. He stepped directly between his daughter and the bullets meant for her. He didn't survive it. Ruth's own shooting that night was faster, more accurate, more devastating than any of the 3 attackers. She wounded 2 of them badly enough to end the fight instantly, and none of it mattered, because the one person that skill was truly meant to protect had died protecting her instead. For 3 years, Ruth carried a grief tangled up with guilt, the terrible irony that the very gift her father gave her couldn't save him, and a deeper fear that any lawman who ever saw her shoot would assume she was hiding something dangerous, rather than something simply quietly tragic. Now imagine carrying that story into a brand new town, a brand new marriage, and a sheriff's suspicious eyes, all 4 days after stepping off the train. Do you think a skill like Ruth's is a blessing? Or a curse dressed up as one? Sound off in the comments. Smash that like button if this story is hitting you right in the chest. And subscribe so you don't miss part 3 on where Ruth finally gets the reckoning she's been owed for 3 long years. 2 strangers, the same wound, 1 unexpected trust. They had spent 3 years protecting themselves from the exact same kind of pain from opposite directions. When Ruth finished her story, Amos Cutter stood in the street for a long, silent moment, his weapon now fully lowered. What he'd assumed was suspicious competence 20 minutes earlier was, in truth, one of the heaviest griefs he'd ever heard a stranger speak aloud, so he gave her one of his own. 3 years earlier, Amos had lost a close friend and fellow deputy, Silas Reed, who'd trusted a charming stranger without asking the hard questions Amos always insisted on. That stranger turned out to be wanted in 2 territories for armed robbery, and it cost Silas his life. Amos had carried that loss like armor ever since. Verify first, trust second, and never let impressive charm or skill substitute for an actual examined history. Ruth listened and something shifted in her expression. Recognition. 2 people shaped by the exact same season of loss had spent 3 years running from it in opposite directions. She had learned to expect to be doubted. He had learned to doubt first. Neither lesson, she said gently, had served either of them particularly well. Amos didn't argue. Instead, he did something almost unheard of for a frontier lawman. He extended his hand. Ruth studied him for a moment, then shook it. Both of them understanding this handshake settled something far bigger than one afternoon standoff. 3 days later, Amos rode back out to the Doss Ranch, not on official business, but simply to apologize properly, hat in hand, for meeting her heroism with suspicion instead of gratitude. But the real test came 2 months later, when a smooth-talking land surveyor named Cornelius rode into town with official-looking papers and a story that convinced almost everyone, except Ruth, whose instincts flagged something off about his questions. This time, Amos didn't dismiss her concern, and he didn't blindly trust the stranger's polished papers either. He asked careful questions. He sent a telegraph to verify, and the truth came back exactly as Ruth suspected. No surveyor named Cornelius Ray existed on any territorial payroll. The papers were forgeries. The danger was real. The very lesson Ruth had asked for that first day in the street, verify, then genuinely believe, had just saved the whole town from a con man, gathering information for something far worse. 2 people, 1 devastating loss apiece, and a hard-won trust that turned out to be exactly what Bannack needed when it mattered most. If a story about earned trust, buried grief, and a woman who refused to be underestimated moved you even a little, that's exactly the kind of story we tell here every week. Hit like, drop a comment on which part hit you hardest, and subscribe right now so you never miss the next one. Story 4 is coming, don't miss it.